All right, just a couple of practices that some people in the Ozarks would have considered witchcraft or anti-witchcraft in one case, or at least kind of messing around with, witchcraft, devilish sorts of powers. And these are things that a lot of people in the Ozarks would not have done, but there were examples of them into the early 20th century. One of them was called the egg tree, which was an old tradition. I'm not sure where this goes back to, what country this comes from or anything, or even if we know. But the egg tree, Vance Randolph found a few rare examples of egg trees in southwest Missouri in the early 1900s, and heard old-timers talking about remembering more when there were more of these egg trees. And these were usually dead bushes that were stuck in the ground, often underneath a cedar tree, and eggshells were placed on the limbs of the bushes, and these were supposed to ward off witches. So that's an interesting variation of this, and I was just reading this last week in a book. A woman who had been born in the late 1800s and had grown up in the Ozarks remembered back to her childhood when her mother in the summertime would would cut a cedar tree, bring it in the house, would put it in the fireplace, in the chimney there, and would hang eggshells on the cedar tree. And the woman who remembers this remembered it as being a decoration, like you would, instead of just having a big open fireplace that you're not using, the chimney you're not using in the summertime because it's warm. Her idea was that her mother just put it there to decorate the house. But I wonder, if her mother may have had other reasons for having that tree, except she didn't use a dead bush. It was a dead cedar tree in this case that they put in the chimney. But it's an interesting sort of variation of the egg tree that Vance Randolph described. And this would have been around 1900 or the late 1800s that the woman was remembering this tree in their chimney. So that's kind of a neat sort of thing. But again, there's an entire chapter in Vance Randolph's book devoted to the traditions and customs associated with witchcraft. He was really interested in that kind of stuff. You didn't find a lot of people in the rural Ozarks who practiced witchcraft, but there were a few, and he really sought them out and recorded a lot of traditions that they had. And there were still a lot of people who had superstitions that had to do with witches and cats and things like that. Not that many people practiced witchcraft, but people knew about a lot of the superstitions surrounding it. Now, this is an interesting one too, and I've read accounts of dumb suppers or dummy suppers in several different places even from the early 1900s in the Ozarks. And the dumb supper in the Ozarks, we'll get back to the Gaelic festival in a minute. The dumb supper in the Ozarks, the way it's usually described is, in the cases that I've read, it doesn't have to take place on a certain night or anything like that, but it always happens at night. And it's sometimes called a backward supper, because what it was is usually a group of young women would get together, and this is always something that women did, or usually unmarried girls or young women would get together late at night, and they would make a supper, beans and cornbread or whatever the normal stuff that you would eat in the rural Ozarks, and they would do everything backwards. They would stand with their backs to the stove, and they would pour the drinks behind them, and that's why it was sometimes called a backward supper. You do everything backwards. You would set the table backwards, turn the chairs away from the table. all this kind of stuff. You did everything in reverse order of what you would normally do, and you did it kind of with your back to, turned around from how you would normally do it. And you go through all this process, and the idea is that you get the supper done and you have it ready just before midnight, and when the clock strikes midnight, the idea is that you're making these, you set the table and you put the food on the plates and all this kind of stuff, and you're making these plates for your future husband. That's why it's single girls who do this. And the idea is that you stand behind your future husband's setting, and when the clock strikes midnight, you'll see like a ghostly image of the man who will be your husband. And that was, so it was kind of an occult sort of thing that women, the same sort of seance, sort of scare yourself, that you can imagine what's going on. After a while in the Ozarks, sometimes it turned into, they would have these suppers, and the idea was that your future husband would actually come into the house at midnight, and sometimes they would get word around, to Millie's sweetheart that she's doing a dumb supper tonight, and wouldn't it be neat if you came in the house at midnight? And so the guy would actually come in, and you kind of lose some of the occult, otherworldly element of it, a little bit like that. But that was the dumb supper, and where it probably grows out of, and these dumb suppers were chronicled as early as the 1600s in England. So they were something that they were brought across the ocean here. And they probably date back in a much different form to the Gaelic festival of Samhain, which was a Halloween night festival, a pagan sort of festival. The idea there was you would set the table, you would make this supper, and at midnight the recently deceased would come back, at least in spirit, and sort of as a parting, that would be kind of their last supper with you, your last communion with your recently deceased loved ones. And this would happen on Halloween night. And so more than likely, I think the dumb supper probably is some kind of, offshoot of that just got a little less morbid by looking toward the future instead of looking to the past and lamenting, lost loved ones, and now you're looking to the future of who you're going to marry, that sort of thing. And it becomes something just for unmarried young women.
How does all of this fit with their religious beliefs?
Well, that's interesting. The same woman who was talking about that I told you I was reading, and she was talking about this egg tree, her mother bringing this cedar tree and that. She mentions knowing neighbors who had one of these dumb suppers, and she said that her mother wouldn't let them because she considered it witchcraft. She considered it unchristian to do this silly sort of stuff. And just like, some people would consider like a Ouija board or something like that to be unchristian or dabbling in witchcraft, that sort of thing. And so it didn't mix well with a lot of religious beliefs. Some people probably did it anyway, just like some Christians and other religious people today will, do things like seances and stuff like that, and consider it just kind of harmless fun or something. But as I mentioned, religion is one of the things that helps tear down these old traditions and customs. It's as people, and especially as you go through the 19th century and into the 20th century, and as the Methodists and the Baptists and the people who kind of dominated religion in the Ozarks, which we'll talk about after the midterm, became more and more kind of middle class and respectable, these kinds of practices traditions, superstitions were considered unacceptable.